Welcome. My name is Barbara Collier, and I'm the Executive Director of Communication Disabilities Access Canada. This is a webinar about how to use a communication intermediary, and it's for people who have communication disabilities, their family members, and supporters. I'd like to acknowledge funding for this webinar from the Law Foundation of Ontario. And what we're going to be talking about is communicating with police, lawyers, and justice professionals. We're going to be talking about your communication access rights to these services. And specifically, we're going to focus on using a communication intermediary, and we'll end up with some frequently asked questions. You may want to communicate a lawyer for lots of different reasons. Regarding your services, power of attorney, human rights, abuses, family violence, caregiver violence, consumer and criminal law, about employment issues, housing issues, social assistance, tribunals, financial matters, making a will, or assessments of capacity. Lots of different reasons to communicate with a lawyer. And you can get a lot of information about communicating with lawyers. We've done a number of webinars. They're on our website, and this is the link to it. We've done them with Brendan Poran and Megan Haynes, and we've got a webinar on access to goods and services, consent to treatment, substitute decision makers, personal support services, and abuse and crimes. And these webinars are specifically for people with communication disabilities, where we talk about your rights, but we also talk about some communication tools and strategies that you can use around these topics. If you need to contact a lawyer, you can do that in your own location, a personal lawyer. And in Ontario, we've got Legal Aid Ontario. We also have Community Legal Education Ontario, and they've got some really nice things on their website that you can use. There's the Arch Disability Law Centre, and there's Human Rights Legal Resource Centre. And we're going to give you a handout that you can download, and that'll give you the contact information for those resources. Why would you want to communicate with the police? Well, there's a number of different reasons. You may be in an emergency situation like a fire, there's a crime in process, or there's a medical emergency. And then there's other situations which are not immediately urgent, like reporting a theft or vandalism or fraud issues. You might have a safety concern about you or somebody else. Or it might be relating to Crime Stoppers, where you want to give the police information about a crime. Again, you can contact your local police station, and we always recommend that you find out if there's a special unit for people who have disabilities. You can contact them in emergencies by calling 911. And we're aware that many people with communication disabilities have challenges using the phone. You may prefer to use text. Now, you can get information as to how you can text in an emergency by going to this website, and we'll put it on the handout as well. And you need to register for that and find out how to do it. It's worth doing. People with communication disabilities, and you know this well, can experience barriers communicating because it may be difficult for you to speak. It may be difficult for some people to understand what's being said to them and the questions they're being asked. It may be challenging to express your thoughts in a clear manner. You may have difficulty finding the words that you want to say, or it may be challenging to focus and remember what's being said. Or it may be because you communicate in ways that police, legal, and justice services may not understand, such as using pictures, symbols, spelling out words on an alphabet board or a letter board, or using a speech generating device. Or you may have all of these things in place, but you don't have the vocabulary that you want to use to communicate. There's another side to this. Police, legal, and justice professionals may create barriers because they don't know how you communicate. They can't ask questions in ways that you understand or can answer. They may assume you can't make your own decisions and underestimate your abilities. They may ask your relatives to speak for you, and this may not be your wish. And they may not allow you to use your preferred communication method. For example, they may just ask you yes/no questions where you really want to use a communication display or to speak. The other barrier that we've heard time and time again, it should be on this slide, is that they may not believe you. We've heard that as well. Now, you do have rights when it comes to accessing services here in Ontario and actually across Canada. These services must be made accessible to you. And the laws that we have about that are the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities that Canada has signed. We have in Ontario the Ontario Human Rights Code. We also have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So there's a lot of laws there, and these laws clearly state that if you need supports to communicate with services, then you should be given those supports. What types of supports are we talking about? Communication supports that you may need, and everybody is different, might include communication assistance. So someone to explain to the police or to the lawyer or to the justice professional how you communicate. Or you may need their assistance to make sure that your message is understood. Or you may need their assistance to make sure that people ask you questions you can understand and can answer. You may need to have communication tools and aids such as pictures, words, and objects to help you understand and to express what you want to communicate. These are communication accommodations and supports that you may need to access police, legal, and justice services in the same way as anybody else. Let's look at communication assistance to justice services. There's two types. First of all, there's a family or a familiar person, so someone you know, someone you trust that can help you communicate in these situations. There's also a communication intermediary, and we're going to be telling you about intermediaries. And that's someone that you can use if you don't have someone you trust, or if you want to assist you. For instance, you may want to have some privacy. You may not want to have a staff person or a family member accompany you and hear what you're communicating to police or to a lawyer or to a justice professional. Or in some situations, a police officer, lawyer, or justice person may want you to use a professional to assist with communication because they want to hear directly from you and make sure that your communication is not influenced by somebody else. A communication intermediary can then assist you when communicating with a police officer, lawyer, or when in court, such as telling police what happened, disclosing, discussing a legal matter with a lawyer, such as making a will, or communicating in a court. So what is a communication intermediary? A communication intermediary is a speech-language pathologist, so they have the equivalent of a master's degree or higher in the area of communication disabilities. And they have special training from CDAC to help people communicate with police, legal and justice professionals. So a communication intermediary is not all speech language pathologists. It's somebody that has special training from CDAC, and that's us, Communication Disabilities Access Canada, to help in these situations. So what do they help with? They can help police officers, lawyers, and justice professionals understand your communication. They can help you understand questions that you might be asked if you need help with that. They can help you communicate what you want to say by giving you communication boards, pictures, letters, calendars, diagrams that you can use to communicate your information. And they can also keep your information private. They will always do that. Here's what a communication intermediary cannot do, and this is very important. It's almost as important as what they can do. They cannot tell you what to do or what to say. They cannot advocate on your behalf. They cannot represent you. They cannot give you legal advice. They cannot advise or teach you what to communicate. They cannot provide personal attendant services, and they cannot give an opinion about what you communicate, whether they believe you or not. A communication intermediary in any criminal situation, so in a serious situation or a criminal situation, cannot discuss the case directly with you. They must work in the presence of the police officer, the lawyer, or the justice professional. They cannot have a private meeting or a conversation with you. And that's to safeguard your testimony. How do you get a communication intermediary? Well, sometimes the police, the lawyer, or the justice professional will want to get the intermediary. But you can also ask for an intermediary to assist you if you feel that this is something you need, and if you feel that the police or the lawyer or the justice professional is not asking you things in ways you can understand, or not really listening to you, or knowing or giving you the opportunity or the time to communicate everything that you want to say. So you're within your rights to ask for somebody to assist you. If you ask the police, lawyer, or justice person for a communication intermediary, you may need to tell them where to get one. And that's because these services are new. So it really helps for you to know where they can go to get an intermediary. So you could have a message ready for them, and the message we're suggesting is something that goes something like this, and you could have it on a card, or you could have it in your device. To make your services accessible to me, I need someone to help with communication. Please get me a communication intermediary who has experience working with people who communicate like me. You can get information and see a list of intermediaries at this website. Again, this is going to be in your handout. Now, if there's no intermediary in your area, say the police have looked at the list, and you might have gone onto the list as well, it's on the CDAC website, and there's just no intermediary, then we would suggest that you get communication assistance from a speech language pathologist or a clinician who works in an augmentative and alternative communication clinic. This may be somebody that you know has provided you services in the past, or it may be another speech language pathologist or AAC clinician. To find a speech language pathologist, you could contact your local disability organization to help you with that, the local clinic, local hospital, or you can contact the Ontario Speech Language and Audiologists Association. We'll put that information and a link to that in the handouts. Big question. Who pays the communication intermediary? Well, the bottom line is you should not have to pay for the intermediary. In order to make their services accessible to you, it's the responsibility of the police, the legal, the justice person to make to pay for the intermediary in the same way that they would pay for a sign language interpreter for someone who's deaf or a translator for somebody who doesn't speak English or French. The other thing is that disability organizations may be able to help pay for the intermediary services. So that's something that you may need to give the police, a lawyer and justice person with the contact of a disability organization, or indeed they can contact CDAC for information on that. Meeting a communication intermediary. First of all, the police, legal and justice person will arrange for the intermediary to meet with you, and they will also attend that meeting. I'd suggest that you spend some time getting to know each other because this is a very important person. The intermediary is going to have to be someone you trust and someone that you feel that can communicate well with you and that can assist you communicating. So don't talk about the case itself, if this is a criminal situation, but spend some time communicating about other things, like asking the intermediary about their work or telling them a little bit about yourself. The intermediary is going to ask you to sign some forms. First of all, the form, they'll need you to sign a form that gives them permission to find out what you need when communicating with police, lawyer, or justice people. So basically, it's an assessment of your communication needs, and you need to authorize them to do that. The intermediary will sign a form that tells you that they will keep everything private and confidential and will not discuss your communication or anything about the case with anyone except the police, the lawyer, or the justice person. And they should give you copies of these forms. The intermediary will then ask you questions to find out what supports you might need. For example, they might talk with you about how the police, the lawyer, or the justice person can ask questions that you can understand and answer. An example of that might be not to ask, if you use a communication display, not to ask you too many questions at once, just ask you one question at a time, and not to put a negative in the question, like you didn't see her, did you? So to avoid those types of questions, which are difficult for people with communication disabilities to answer clearly. They might talk to you about any pictures, written words, or objects that you might need to communicate what you want to say. They might talk to you about what to do if your message is not understood, and what you might need to reduce your anxiety and stress levels. The intermediary then writes a report and explains all of this to the police, lawyer, or justice person, and demonstrates what they should do when communicating with you. In most cases, the intermediary will recommend that they accompany you to the meeting or to the interview or to the court to assist you communicating at all times. However, it's up to the police, the legal or justice services to allow you to use an intermediary within these situations. They're paying for this service, and they must then authorize that you can bring an intermediary with you. Here are some things that the intermediary might assist you with, but remember, you are always in charge of your communication. Look and direct your communication directly to the police, lawyer, or the justice professional. Excuse me. The intermediary will sit beside you and only assist you when needed. Sometimes the intermediary will know when to assist, but other times you may need to signal to them that you need some help. The main thing is that there's always three people in this interaction. There's going to be you, the intermediary sitting beside you, and the police, lawyer, or justice person probably sitting across the table from you. It's a good idea to have agreed on any signals or words that you will use to direct the intermediary. For example, saying yes or signaling yes to agree with people's interpretation of what you're saying. So you say something, perhaps your speech is unclear, perhaps the intermediary is echoing that or saying it again for you so that the other person understands, and you're nodding and saying, yes, that's what I said. Or you're disagreeing. You're saying no or signaling no, that is not what I'm saying to you. That's not what I'm communicating to you. Ask the intermediary to give you a way to communicate. And this could be, if you can say it, that's fine. However, many people like to have a card in front of them. And this could be done in pictures or words that they can point to say, I don't understand. I don't remember. I don't know. Maybe that's not what I meant. I want to communicate something, or I want to communicate more, and please repeat the question or say it in another way. Whatever things you need to be able to say fairly quickly, fairly routinely, the intermediary could put these on a card for you. The intermediary may also give you other ways to communicate. So sometimes dolls can be used, like wooden dolls or figures. Sometimes a calendar could be used that you could point to. Maps are very useful to say where things happened. Diagrams. Pictures can be used. Pictures of crimes, photographs of people and places. The intermediary can help give you some of those things so that you can use them to communicate. And also an anxiety chart. And we've got all of these things on our website. The anxiety chart basically says, I'm okay, but then it could say, I'm really getting very anxious or I need a break. Here are some frequently asked questions that we get about intermediaries. What if the police officer, lawyer, or justice person doesn't agree to get me an intermediary? Well, first of all, you may want to tell them what type of disability you have and why, how this affects your communication and why you need an intermediary. You may want to explain how you need an intermediary is the very same way that a person who's deaf might need a sign language interpreter, or somebody who speaks another language may need a translator. You might need to explain that without communication support, you don't have access to their services. Without effective communication, you can't access the police, legal, or justice services. You might ask them to visit our website or to read about communication intermediaries. Again, I'll give you that on the handout. But you can also ask them to contact the Ministry of the Attorney General's Accessibility Division or to talk to me at CDAC. What if I don't get or don't like how the intermediary supports my communication? Well, that's very important because you need to tell the intermediary what you want them to do and not to do, and discuss any problems you have with how the intermediary supports you. The intermediary can explain what they can and cannot do. That just may be a matter of clarifying things, but you should feel very comfortable with how the intermediary is supporting you. If the intermediary does not have experience supporting the type of communication method that you use, then you should ask the police officer, lawyer, or justice person to get you another intermediary who has that experience. The next question is, I would prefer to have my mother assist me communicating, not a communication intermediary. Is that okay? Well, it's okay in some situations, and that depends on a decision by the police, by the lawyer, or the justice person. And it's okay, especially if you're comfortable discussing these issues in front of your mother, and if the situation is not a serious or a criminal matter. But there are situations where you may prefer somebody other than a family member or someone you know well to help you communicate for reasons of privacy and confidentiality. Again, as I said earlier, in criminal situations, the police, lawyer, or justice person may insist on using an intermediary because they want to hear directly from you, and they don't want somebody who's close to you, who knows you, who might influence what you're communicating. And remember, intermediaries are impartial. They don't take sides, and they have training to support communication in these situations. They don't work for you, they work within the situation. And if it's a criminal court, they're an officer of the court. Can I use a communication intermediary in other situations? Communication intermediaries and speech language pathologists are often used in healthcare when a person's communication impacts on serious decisions and where healthcare providers have difficulty understanding what the person might be saying. For example, when giving consent to a serious treatment or a decision, when determining a person's capacity to make decisions, and specifically around end-of-life directives. In these situations, it doesn't have to be a communication intermediary as much as it may be a speech-language pathologist to help with communication. Now, we've got lots more information on our website at www.accesstojustice.org, and there you'll find information about communication intermediaries. You'll see the roster, a list of intermediaries in Ontario. You may want to print off or download intermediaries in your area so that you have them in case you need them. You'll also find information and webinars on legal topics that I mentioned earlier, and information about your communication rights in other situations. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope this has been useful.